All right, so Lori, you ready?
Yep.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. My name's Jamie Doherty. I'm the residential horticultural agent here in Lake County. And today I have Lori Johnson, who is our family and consumer science agent here at Lake County. And we're going to talk to you about you can eat that. And we're talking about plant parts and nutrition. Let's see if I can get stuff to work. There we go. So if you're a bit unfamiliar with Zoom, just a few things to let you know what's going on. All participants on this Zoom webinar are going to be silenced and you will have no video, so don't be too worried about that. And for chatting purposes, there's actually a chat box. You can type in questions, comments, and we'll be watching for those as we come through. And we'll do our best to answer as we move forward, but we might end up missing some and try to just cover it at the end there. We are recording the video so that we can share it again later. So if you miss something or have somebody that you want to share this with, you'll be able to. All right, so I'm going to start off with asking you a question, and I would like you to write the answer in the chat box so we can have some participation. So where do vegetables come from? Come on, guys, I know you got it. It's not a trick question. The flower of the plant, seeds. Okay, got seeds as a question. I mean, philosophically speaking, yes, they come from seeds. Charlotte, sorry, you got it right. They come from all parts of the plant. Okay, and so I'm going to tell you a bit about the parts of the plant to get started. So you have things such as a reproductive shoot that produces a flower. You have different types of buds. So at the top, you have what's referred to as an apical bud, and that's for like growth up. And then you have apical buds also at the end of branches. And you have what's called as axillary buds, which are kind of at the sides of the stem that are ready for additional growth if an apical bud is ever cut. And that's one of the reasons why pruning plants properly helps with increasing flowers and also increasing fruit and veg production. So you also have the leaf, right? Leaf is a very important part of the plant. You have the stem, and all of that together is referred to as the shoot system. And then you also have the root system that's very important. So today we're going to be talking about all of those different parts of the plant, and we're going to be talking about two different vegetables that come from each part. So how it's going to work is I'm going to talk about kind of the botany behind things and a little bit of the gardening side of things, and Lori's going to talk about the health and nutrition side and give us some wonderful recipes, suggestions. Now I do have a fun fact, and I'm going to ask and see if anybody knows the answer. So is anybody aware of what kale, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, and kohlrabi have in common? You can also write no. They're all in the same plant. They're all the same plant. Basically, that is correct, guys. So what it is they've all been selectively bred from wild mustard seed for specific parts of the plant. And it's a great example of taking that selective breeding to create larger parts of different parts of the plant that you want for vegetables, right? So kale's obviously been bred for leaves, where you have Brussels sprouts that's been bred for buds. All right, so back to botany, or for your first time if you've never been. So first off, we're going to talk about leaves. So leaves are really important because they're basically the powerhouse of the cell. That's where the majority of photosynthesis occurs. And photosynthesis is this amazing and super important process where the plants are able to convert solar energy into carbohydrates that then we use to make ourselves. And it's basically the source of life on the planet. Is if plants didn't actually do this conversion of chemicals, we're not sure how on Earth would be able to sustain life. So it's highly important. And you see the cells in that picture, which is really cool because you can see the green spots, which are all the little chloroplasts. And if you see them circling something, that's the central vacuole that's full of water. Super important. And I promise I'll do a botany presentation later. Okay, so these are all leaves are made of these kind of cheap cells that are classed as parenchyma cells. And the reason they're cheap cells is leaves get broken a lot, right? They get broken in a storm, they get broken by people walking by and ripping them off, they get broken by things eating them. So they need to be replaced quite a lot so that the plant can still photosynthesize to produce sugars for itself. So we have these nice cheap cells to make lots of leaves. And if you're growing leafy vegetables in your garden, what's nice about them is you can collect outside leaves and you can still let the plant grow so you can keep getting more leaves from most of them for quite a long time. So our first plant that we're going to talk about with leaves is Swiss chard. This will grow in Florida. You're going to want to plant it September to May, so you can get ready to get this planted in the fall. You'll have harvest in about 45 days, and you can either harvest individual leaves as needed, or you can harvest the whole plant. And so Lori.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So Swiss chard is rich in vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, iron, and potassium. And calcium helps in our bone and teeth formation, as well as it has blood clotting factors. And iron helps provide energy and also helps with our red blood cell formation. So really important and a great powerhouse of nutrition found in Swiss chard. And on the next slide, I have about cooking with Swiss chard. So it can be eaten raw or cooked. The stems can be a little tough, but when it cooks down, it cooks more like a spinach texture. Different ways that you can prepare it by sauteing it in some olive oil and garlic. And sauteing is just cooking your food quickly in a little bit of fat in a high heat and kind of tossing it around so it doesn't burn. It's a great way to cook vegetables in. So that's an example for Swiss chard, as well as steamed. Put it in your soups and stews, and even enjoy it as a salad with a nice light vinaigrette is great on a hot day.
All right, so our next leafy plant is bok choy. Now, bok choy is one of these things that you may see in the grocery store and not know what to do with, but you can grow it in Florida, and it's another one that you can get ready to start planting this fall. You're going to be able to harvest in 40 to 50 days. And again, this is going to be, you can either harvest leaves on the outside or you can harvest the entire plant.
All right. And bok choy has vitamin A, vitamin C, and folate. Vitamin A is going to help with our skin and our bone formation, and vitamin C is going to help with our immunity, which is so important. So a couple ways to cook bok choy. One is it's really great steamed. For steaming, you're going to cut it into smaller pieces and then add to your saucepan about 1 inch or 2 of water. Then you're going to put your steamer basket on top of that water, add your bok choy, cover that, and bring that to a boil, and then reduce it to a lower boil. Cooking it, just cook it to the length of time that your recipe you may be using says to, or you can just cook it to a crisp, tender texture, or the texture that you prefer. So it kind of has varying degrees. Stir frying is a great option to combine veggies, flavors, and then adding your choice of protein, whether that be shrimp, beef, pork, chicken, or making it all vegetarian. A combination with bok choy for stir frying could be also to add some cashews and carrots, some ginger, garlic, bell pepper, mushrooms, and some fresh lemongrass. So mixing it up and including different things gives you different vitamin and mineral benefits. On the next slide, I have a recipe for chicken salad with bok choy. And after today's session, in the follow-up email, you'll receive a recipe card that has the ingredients for this. This is a really light and refreshing salad. It really combines the flavors of the radishes with the dried apricots and then chicken really well, and the dressing gives it a light citrus flavor. It ties it all together. It's great on a hot day. The only suggestion I have is just to make sure you keep the dressing separate until you're ready to enjoy your salad. Otherwise, the bok choy gets a little wimpy. So you want to make sure those leaves are nice and strong and the texture that you want to enjoy them in.
Great. All right, so moving on from the leaves, we're going to go to the stems. So I'm going to talk a bit about stem function. Does anybody have any guesses as to the major functions of stems in plants? I'm just watching the chat. Hold the plant upright. Good job, Carol. So one of the major things is holding the plant upright, but it's also nutrition. So it's moving nutrition around the plant. So nutrient and water transport. It's also holding the leaves up to the light for photosynthesis and also holding the flowers up for pollinators. Now, inside the stems, there's all kind of different cells that do all kind of different things. The two major cell types that are going to be needed for transport are the xylem and the phloem. Now, to keep things super simple today, the xylem basically is moving nutrients and water up and around the plant, and the phloem is moving the photosynthate, which is the product of photosynthesis, either down to the roots for storage or up to new shoots for further growth. It's a little more complicated than that. Okay, I lied. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that's good enough for now. So first up in our stems, we have cinnamon. Now, technically cinnamon's a spice, but it is harvested from the bark of the cinnamon tree, which you can actually grow a cinnamon tree in Florida, but generally I recommend that you go buy the cinnamon at a store because even if you grow the plant, harvesting cinnamon's kind of hard and a little bit of a pain. So this is one you might want to keep to the professionals and just go to the store and get your cinnamon sticks.
But cinnamon does have great health benefits, so you do want to make sure that you're incorporating it as part of your diet. There's been research that it may help improve type 2 diabetes and help reduce cholesterol levels. So in cooking with cinnamon, on the next slide, there's a lot of different ways, and remember, a little goes a long way because this is a spice, so you just want to experiment with different amounts. Maybe adding a little bit to your tea or hot cocoa, or sprinkling some on some fresh fruit, or maybe a fresh fruit salsa you're making, or making your own homemade pita chips with tortillas in your oven, sprinkling a little bit of cinnamon on them, gives it that sweet flavor, or topping your pork chops with cinnamon apples, or coating some extra sweet potatoes with some cinnamon and honey for that sweetness, or making butternut squash with it, or adding a little to your oatmeal or yogurt. So a lot of great benefits. These are just a few ways that you can use cinnamon, but I encourage you to cook with cinnamon and other spices in your cooking.
My personal favorite is cinnamon sugar on toast.
Nice.
All right, so our next stem is actually going to be rhubarb. So rhubarb is that pink celery looking stuff that you see at the store, usually conveniently around the start of strawberry season. So the pink in celery has nothing to do with ripeness. So the pink has to do with genes. It just, the color of the stems has to do with the genes of the plant. You can't get a stem ripe. When talking about plants and ripeness, you're talking about the fruit. Is the fruit ripe yet? You're not talking about if the stem or the leaves are ripe. So it's just different terminology. But because it's a color, sometimes people think, well, if the color's off, it mustn't be ready yet. But it's not necessarily the case with these guys. So again, with that, and I think, sorry. For these, it's best to buy fresh or frozen.
With rhubarb, you can't eat the leaves. They are poisonous. The rest of it does contain vitamin C, and that is great for immune function. And then on the next slide, we have some ways that you can cook with rhubarb. It's great to be made into some jam or used on some baked goods such as scones, for an example. Or you can change up your salsa and make salsa with rhubarb and some cucumber instead of your traditional salsa. It can be made into a sauce or a spread, adding it to some yogurt or other breakfast favorites like an English muffin or even pancakes. And it can also be used to make lemonade. And on the next slide, I have a recipe for some strawberry rhubarb lemonade. It's great to make with some fresh lemon peel and also some fresh strawberries to give you a cool and refreshing flavor with some sweetness.
All right, so I just noticed a comment, and no, you cannot grow rhubarb in Florida. That's why it's best to buy it fresh or frozen. All right, so next up is we're going to talk about buds. Now, I know I'm using rosebuds here. Please don't go eat rosebuds. They're not necessarily the best thing to eat. I just needed an example picture. So buds are these areas of new growth on the plant, and the bud could lead to a flower, it could lead to leaves, it could lead to new stem growth as well. Wow, I'm just jumping all the way ahead of myself. I'm sorry. So we're going to talk about a couple of different buds. One of them I'm sure you're familiar with, and the other one you may be like me and look at it at the grocery store and say, I don't even know where to start with that. And Lori's going to help us with that. So Brussels sprouts, again, one from our wonderful wild mustard plant. So you can grow these in Florida. You want to plant them in the fall. And you can see this is kind of interesting, especially if you've never seen Brussels sprouts and how they grow. So it's basically this massive stem with these super enlarged axillary buds. That is what we cook, and I think they're quite tasty.
Awesome. And Jamie, I do have a question about Brussels sprouts, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I tried to grow them and they were much smaller than your photo and what you buy in the store. They were more like the ones, the wee top. Is that common, or is there something I can do to get bigger Brussels sprouts?
It's not uncommon to have any of your fruits or vegetables in a home garden show up as smaller. Part of it has to do with application of herbicides. Another part could do with where the seeds actually came from, how old the seeds were. Because I mean, the size has to do with not only fertilization, but also genes. So there's always some natural variation. I know, not related to Brussels sprouts, but my mom and I are constantly in pineapple growing competitions, and hers are regularly 3 times the size of mine, and I can't figure out why.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's helpful. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So for some a little nutrition on Brussels sprouts, they are a good source of fiber, folate, and vitamin C. And you can combine them with some honey and some balsamic vinegar. Make a little mixture, pour that over them to enjoy them, or you can grill them, or you can roast them. And on the next slide, we have a delicious recipe that Jamie has made for us, or for her, and for us to include. So you can roast your Brussels sprouts just like you can roast many other veggies. It's a great way to enjoy vegetables. For this recipe, you need about a pound of Brussels sprouts and 1.5 tablespoons of some olive oil, and about a teaspoon of salt and pepper each, and 1/4 cup of cranberries. So you're going to want to cut those Brussels sprouts in half, toss them in a bowl with some olive oil and the salt and pepper, and then lie them in a single layer on a baking sheet. Get your oven to about 425 and bake for about 20 to 25 minutes. And about halfway through, you want to rotate them and kind of flip them around to get them evenly roasted. And then when you take them out of the oven, add the cranberries to them, and you're ready to go. But it's a great way to add different side dishes by using these fresh veggies. And so, Jamie, I don't know if you have anything else to add on your recipe.
Well, first off, it turned out amazing. I almost ate the entire recipe in one sitting instead of anything else, because it was just the best Brussels sprouts I've ever had. I was very proud that I made them. I like them so much. In fact, the next week when I was doing some meal prep, I made like 6 pounds of them. They were so good. So I highly recommend them. I can't recommend them enough. In fact, if you thought you didn't like Brussels sprouts, these might make you like them.
Awesome. Thanks.
Let's see. Oh, we got something from Mary. Can you remove the leaves below the little sprouts? Oh, look at that. Mary answered Charlotte's question. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep going because she did it really well. Thank you, Mary. All right, so next up is artichokes. So artichokes are the other bud that we can't grow in Florida because it's just too hot, but I've seen them at the grocery store, and I like artichoke hearts, but I have no idea what to do with it when it's actually in the fresh form.
All right, so they are really rich in fiber, and fiber is really important for our heart health and our digestion. So on the next slide, I have some photos of some fresh artichokes. Artichokes can be really prepared in a variety of ways. They can be steamed, they can be roasted, grilled, stuffed, baked. There's lots of different recipes out there. An easy way is to steam them. First, you want to cut off the tips of each of the leaves and also slice about a ½ inch off the top and then slice the stem off. You just don't want to get it too close to the bottom so that you don't want your entire artichoke to completely fall apart and all the leaves to go. So cut it close, but not all the way at the bottom. And then you want to also remove some of the bottom leaves. As you can see by the third picture, they might be a little tough and bitter, so you can take those off. And then also next, you want to just rinse that artichoke under some cold water. Try to open up the leaves just a little bit to try to remove any excess dirt that might be there. They are kind of tight, so sometimes it's a little challenging to get water in there, but try to do a good rinse job. Then you want to get a big pot, add a couple inches of water on the bottom, maybe some lemon juice and garlic for just a little bit of flavor. And then put your artichokes in a steamer basket and then cover them and just boil them and just reduce it down, bring it to a boil and reduce it to a simmer. And then you're gonna cook it for about 30 minutes. You can also use a pressure cooker to speed up the process. Whichever you prefer. You can use a Dutch oven. If you don't want to use a steamer basket, that's fine. They can be eaten hot or cold. When you pull the outer leaves, you pull one at a time, and you're gonna place the light end in your mouth and kind of just pull it down. You do not want to eat the entire leaf. That is not going to be good for your digestive system. So you just want to kind of eat the inside of the leaf, and it's like a scraping action, is the best way I can describe it. And once you get to the center, then you get to almost like a fuzzy part, and that's the choke. And so if you cut around the choke, in the inside is the artichoke heart, which you can enjoy by itself, or if you want to dip it in butter or a vinaigrette to eat. However you enjoy, but that's kind of eating the whole artichoke. And then on our next slide, I have a recipe for stuffed artichokes. So if you want a little bit more flavor to them, this is just one way. It's a very basic stuffed artichoke recipe, delicious. So you're going to make the artichokes similar to what I just said. In these I made in a Dutch oven. Again, bringing it to a boil and then just making sure I'm removing it when the outer leaves kind of come out easily. So depending on the size of the artichoke, it might vary in the length of cooking. So that's always something to keep in mind. And then once I've let that cool a little bit, combining some breadcrumbs, cheese, parsley, Italian seasoning, some lemon zest, salt and pepper, mixing that all together. And then as you can see, it's kind of a messy process. You just kind of stuff it in those pockets of the artichoke the best you can. I suggest doing it in the pan you're gonna bake them in, because then you could just make the mess in that one pan and not all over your counter. And then just bake those for about 15 or 20 minutes until that filling gets a little lightly browned. And then when you take your pieces off, just like you would eat your artichoke before, you're still going to scrape the inside. You're just going to have a little extra breading and flavor to go along with it. So again, this is just a basic recipe. It's super delicious, but try artichokes. It's a fun appetizer or side dish. They're a lot of fun to eat.
Yeah. I'm really glad you answered the one question I had, because while you were talking, I was going to ask you if I had to peel the artichoke, and you sort of do, only it's like backwards peeling with your teeth.
Yep.
So that's great. Thank you. Now I might give that a try sometime.
There you go.
Buds, what comes after a bud usually? Normally what we think of is going to be the flowers. Now there's lots of flowers are the showy reproductive part of the plant. The whole point from the plant's perspective is I want to get pollinated, I want to produce fruit, and I want my genetics to continue on. That's all the flower is for the plant. Now for us, flowers are quite a bit more. We enjoy them in lots of ways. Now, ultimately, flowers lead to some sort of fruit that has some sort of seed in it that we'll get to in a few more slides. So what we're talking about for flowers today, we're actually sticking with cauliflower and broccoli. Now there's lots of other edible flowers we could have used, but I wanted to stick with things that we could actually get in the store, whereas most edible flowers, you can't just kind of like go to the grocery store and pick it up. But technically, broccoli and cauliflower are actually flower buds. So if they actually went to flower, you wouldn't want to eat it. They're not going to be super tasty. So there's a couple of pictures of some broccoli that hasn't opened up into flowers yet that you would still be able to actually eat.
Right. And broccoli is high in vitamin C, folate, and fiber. And folate, remember, helps our red blood cells form. So that's really important. So when we cook with broccoli, on the next slide, many times the stems are often not used. And so we want to make sure that we are not creating food waste and eating as much of our foods as we can for that great nutrition, as well as making sure our dollars that we're spending, whether it's growing it or buying in the store, are stretching as far as we can. One idea for those stems is to cut them into fries, place them on a baking sheet, drizzle them with a little olive oil, salt and pepper, maybe some sesame seeds. You can also experiment with different herbs and spices instead of salt, because I always love to cook with other herbs and seasonings besides salt, but it's just up to your preference. And at the temperature that you would roast veggies, so about 400 degrees, and then you can also make broccoli chips. So to do this, you're going to just cut those stalks into very thin slices. Again, tossing them with a little olive oil and then adding your favorite herbs can really mix up dinner time. And then you can also just make sure as you're cooking them to kind of flip them halfway. They probably take about 30 minutes, but it just depends on how much you are making at one time. And then also, if you have a spiralizer, and maybe some folks have made zucchini noodles before, you can do the same thing with these broccoli stalks. Why not spin them into noodles? So you can spin them into noodles by just cutting the ends of the stalks. And then once you have your noodles, adding your own sauce and just combining, and you have a great, delicious side dish. Can be hot or cold. So just some different things to do with broccoli that you may not usually do. We want to save those stalks.
All right, so next up is cauliflower. Now the top picture is actually broccoli flowering so that you could see that. Cauliflower, again, technically not a flower, but that's what we're going with today.
Right, and it is high in vitamin C and also a good source of folate. So when we talk about cooking with cauliflower, cauliflower has been used in a lot more recipes, I would say, in the past several years. Some people use it as a lower carbohydrate or a vegetarian option, maybe instead of the pasta or, other crusts or potatoes. But one idea is to crumble it and make it into an au gratin potato. You can add cheese and garlic and panko breadcrumbs. Panko breadcrumbs are just those thicker sized breadcrumbs that you can purchase. And it gives it a great texture. Cauliflower steaks is also an option for a lighter option or plant-based. It's great as a main meal or as a side dish, and you can top other things on top of that cauliflower steak. You're just going to want to slice it lengthwise, about 4 inches. Again, just on the screen, just coating it with some olive oil and some lemon juice, maybe some salt and pepper or other seasonings, and just roast it for about 15 minutes. At about 400. Again, depends on your oven, depends on the size of your cauliflower. If you're looking for a way to mix up your pizza crust, I love making my own pizza. And so you may be saying, well, I'd want to try this cauliflower crust. Everyone's talking about it. There's tons of different recipes out there. So if it interests you, I encourage you to just check out what might work best for you. But you can make your own pizza by putting together a little cauliflower as the base, and then adding some cheese, oregano, salt, maybe a couple eggs, and salt and pepper. And then that's a great option for changing out your pizza crust from the traditional dough. And then in addition to cooking with cauliflower, I have another recipe. Many folks may have had regular hummus, but you may not have had cauliflower hummus before. So it's made in the same way, where you're just using cauliflower instead of chickpeas. So it's an option to change out your hummus and utilize extra cauliflower you may have. I will say that this recipe is kind of more bland. It's not as flavorful as a traditional hummus may be, because many times you're adding other things like roasted red peppers or artichokes or olives or pine nuts. So I encourage you to utilize this, but then put your own flavor on it, either with other spices and seasonings or other foods that I just mentioned, to kind of pick up the flavor a little bit, because that cauliflower will attach onto that and you still get the great nutrition from it.
All right, so I was staring at the fact that there was honey in that recipe, and I was just a little surprised by that. I got distracted.
Yeah, a little honey to sweeten it up.
There we go. All right, so next up we have fruit, because fruit comes after buds, and I completely expect everybody to know all of those parts for the quiz at the end. I'm kidding, guys. So fruit is designed to protect the seeds. So fruit is produced when you have fertilized ovary tissue from the actual flowers that enlarges. Again, it's there to protect the fruit, and then also for, the fruit's there to protect the seeds, and then also for seed distribution later on. Now, there's lots of different types of fruits. So fruits range from everywhere between dry and fleshy, and all kind of different ones in between. So there's always a fun debate. I used to teach college botany, and there was always a fun debate that we had about what kind of fruit was what, and also what plant part went under what kind of, like what vegetable went under what plant part. Okay, so tomatoes themselves are actually referred to as a berry. Now you can grow these in Florida. You can grow them February to September. Now there is a problem with white fly in tomatoes that you kind of have to keep an eye out for, because you're going to possibly have to spray. Where I used to live, I always got white fly. It was kind of super annoying. Just when the tomatoes got great, would end up having our white fly. But yeah, so tomatoes are great. And if everybody gets in that argument, tomatoes are vegetables, and then somebody's like, no, tomatoes are fruit, botanically speaking, it's a berry. So we can get totally technical on that. All right, so next.
All right, and tomatoes are high in vitamin A and vitamin C, and they're a good source of potassium. And potassium is important because it helps regulate our blood pressure and our heart function. So we want to make sure that we're consuming lots of yummy tomatoes. And to do that, one great way on the next slide is making your own pizza. It's a great way to get your family involved in cooking. It lets you control the ingredients from the crust to the toppings, just like we were talking about the cauliflower crust. This is a whole grain crust. Because we should all aim for half of our grains being whole grains. But if whole grain crust is not your thing for pizza, that's okay. I do make regular pizza as well. But either way, find a crust that works for you. Making your own dough is super easy. Doesn't take that many ingredients at all. And I know Jamie mentioned honey in one of the other slides. I actually put a little bit of honey in my dough because I like a little bit of a sweet taste in my pizza. But you can cut up some fresh tomatoes, add some fresh mozzarella, some fresh basil, and drizzle with some balsamic vinegar, and you're ready to go. Pizza can be made inside in your oven, but my favorite is on our grill. If you are able to have a grill outside in a ventilated area, getting it to a high temperature, this pizza can cook in under 10 minutes. So it's a great way to try something new, and then also to not have to heat up your house on these hot summer days, but utilizing that barbecue for something besides those hamburgers and hot dogs. So give it a try.
Okay, you're making me hungry, Lori.
That's what I do.
So our next fruit is going to be the cucumber, and the cucumber, for classification of fruit, it's referred to as a pepo. So it's in the same grouping as pumpkins, watermelon, cantaloupe. So it's got a harder outer shell. Now, obviously cantaloupes and pumpkins have a harder shell than cucumber, but it's still classed as a pepo. Now, something to keep in mind if you're planting this, because you can plant this in your garden, is they are a huge spreading plant. And you need to give them lots of space. So when you're looking at your seed packet and it says something that seems crazy, like give 5 feet of space between seeds, do it, because they will actually take up that much space. They just kind of keep growing, and they get really large flowers on them. And it's, for me, it was really exciting when they actually started to bloom and I started to get things on them. So planting on these, you're going to have to wait a little bit if you want to do between January and February, but you can plant in September as well. It's one of those great options where you have a couple of times of year you can plant. Normal harvest is 40 to 65 days. And there's different types of cucumbers. So you can have cucumbers that are for pickling or cucumbers that are actually for eating. So if you're going to the store, just pay attention to the cucumbers you're buying, because you don't want to buy the wrong one if you're trying to grow them for something specific.
And cucumbers are a good source of vitamin C. And remember, vitamin C helps our body with wound healing. So that's really important. On the next slide, cooking with our cucumbers. Cucumbers, just like everything else, is a variety of ways that you can prepare them. Marinating is a great idea. You just want to make sure you have enough time to refrigerate them, either for a couple hours or overnight, to bring some additional flavor to them. You can also turn them into pickles, as Jamie was mentioning, by cleaning, trimming, slicing, adding garlic and dill, along with preparing a brine. And then once they're cooled down, refrigerating them for at least a day to pick up those flavors. And then also making homemade tzatziki sauce, really easy. It's pictured on the right here. Simple recipe. And the only tip I have is, if you make your own tzatziki sauce, you want to make sure that you take your cucumbers and get all of the water out of them. They have a lot of water in them. So putting them in a paper towel or something, cheesecloth, and squeezing it out, you want them to be as dry as possible so that you get that creamy texture as you see on the screen, because otherwise you may get a very watery tzatziki sauce. And then don't forget, in other salads, and adding them with cucumber and feta, or with some fresh herbs and olive oil, that can be done in just minutes. They're also great in soups. You can make your own chilled cucumber soup, especially great way to cool off in these hot summer months. So a lot of uses for cucumber, and some great vitamin C in there.
All right, we had one comment from Carol asking if it's harder to grow cucumbers in Florida. She's had a pretty hard time with them. And it can depend on the variety of cucumber that you buy, your exact location in the state, and also different aspects of your garden. It shouldn't be too terribly difficult. I didn't have too much problems with it down actually in Lake Wales on the Lake Wales Ridge, which I would have thought I would have had more problems. But now that I'm in this area, I'm going to try them this coming season, and I can let you know how it goes for me. All right, so next up are the roots of the plant. So we've now reached the bottom of the plant. So roots are vital for survival. So does anybody want to put in some benefits that roots for plants in general might have? Some things that you're like, hey, this is really important, and a reason we want plants around specifically for their roots. Draw nutrients and water to the plant from the soil. Exactly. Yes. That was exactly what I was looking for. I think it's DISA. I really hope I didn't pronounce that terribly wrong. But preventing soil erosion is one of the big factors to having plants in the correct location. Oh, I'm so glad I got it right. So roots are vital for the plants to survive. That is where they're pulling the extra nutrients from. Like, they get the one ingredient of sunlight from the surface, but most everything else that they're needing is actually coming from the roots. And yes, carbon dioxide is coming in for the leaves as well. So they're going to hold the plant in place, and they also help to reduce soil erosion because they're holding the soil in place as well. So we're going to have the absorption of water, minerals, and gases. So this is something people often forget, is that most roots also need to have some level of gas exchange. So unless you're planting something that is a wetland plant, you can actually drown a plant by overwatering it. So that's something to keep in mind. And funny enough, signs of overwatering in the plant often also look like signs of underwatering. So when in doubt, stick your finger in the soil and see if it's wet or if it's dry. Now, another important part for the plant and for us is that the starches are stored in the roots. So certain plants store starches in a variety of different ways. So our first root that we're going to talk about is carrots, and then we're going to talk about ginger. So carrots are what's called a biennial plant. Does anybody know what that means? It's biennial. The bi gives it away, because bi means two, right? All right, I'm going to give it to you. You guys might be getting tired. So a biennial plant means it grows for 2 years. Now for the carrots, it means that first year they spend all the time growing the root, and then the next year they use the root to actually flower. So if you're growing carrots, you want to make sure that you always harvest in that first year. You can grow them in Florida between August and March. And I know most people think of carrots as being orange, but that actually just came into popularity based on a king, and it's a really crazy story that I don't have memorized. But there's a lot of different colors of carrots, and the colors do have different flavors. So if you get the opportunity to buy a different color carrot, it can be a great way to kind of explore different, different tastes. So you're going to harvest after you plant these in August to March. You can harvest between 70 and 120 days. And again, the color is determined by pigments present, and it does have different tastes.
And they are an excellent source of vitamin A and a good source of vitamin C. So throughout the presentation, I've been talking about good source and excellent source. So what does that mean? Good source means it provides 10 to 19% of the daily value of that particular vitamin or nutrient. When we talk about excellent source, that's 20% or more of that specific vitamin or nutrient. So that's important to remember when you see that on labels of something, or when I've talked about it through this presentation. There are many uses for carrots, but did you know that you can eat the greens? I did not, or I didn't know a good use for it until my carrot crop about 2 years ago. My carrots were really small, and I've much improved that by now, but in the beginning they were not too big. But the greens, there were so many of them, and I did not want to waste them because I love finding new ways to enjoy our foods and to try to prevent food waste. So I found a recipe for carrot top pesto. So there are a lot of different recipes, and I've made 2 different ones each season depending on the ingredients I have. But next we're going to share a quick video with you and share with you just one way of doing it. Listen. And this pesto is super easy to make. I do have the recipe on our UF-IFAS extension YouTube page under Family and Consumer Science playlist. And there's just a lot of uses for it, and you can freeze it. So obviously there's a lot of pesto at one time, so I freeze in smaller containers and use it for some of those other uses on pizza or as a dip or on fish or chicken as I see fit. So it's a great way to utilize those greens, get the nutrition, and have less food waste.
Oh, and just a random fact, if you ever want a pet rabbit, feeding them the greens is great, but the carrot itself, the root, is actually a treat, and you don't want to give them tons of carrots. It can actually really hurt their digestion. Oh, hold on. I'm trying to, there we go. Okay, so ginger is next. So this is a specialized root structure known as a rhizome. And the rhizome's different than other types of roots because the rhizome itself can actually produce roots and shoots. So the entire thing is basically a form of asexual reproduction for the plant in the ground. So you can get different plants kind of popping up, and if the roots are cut, that individual plant is still going to survive. So it also has buds and nodes, which are different than what you would find in normal roots. So it's this wonderful, again, really cool specialized root structure.
And they contain vitamin C, magnesium, and potassium. And magnesium helps our blood sugar and our blood pressure regulate, and it also helps our muscles contract. So a lot of important benefits of having ginger in our diet. So cooking with ginger, on our next slide, since there's many benefits, we want to find different ways to use it. Making your own homemade tea with some fresh ginger can be easy. You just peel and thinly slice it and boil it, and then wait for about 10 minutes. If you want a stronger flavor, you can have it steep a little bit longer. You're removing it from the heat, straining it, and then add some honey to your cup, and there you go. You have a nice cup of ginger tea. You'll also typically use about 2 tablespoons of ginger to about 2 cups of water as a guide, but again, just depends on preference. Fresh ginger can be used as a marinade. Many times it's found with chicken, but really you can use it on other meats, fish, and veggies too. Many times in Asian cuisines, you may see ginger with soy sauce, maybe some rice wine vinegar, some garlic and ginger as one example. Or even with sesame seeds, like a sesame seed ginger sauce, or even lemon ginger. If you're making your homemade soups, you can also flavor the broth with a large chunk of the ginger and just remove that when you're ready to have your broth. Remember, making your own soups helps control sodium, and then from the canned and packaged foods that have a lot of it just because of preservation. So when you're making your own, you're controlling what you're putting into it. And remember, you can always freeze soups into smaller containers and have them for a later period of time, making them a quick, easy access meal. And then also it can be made into jams. So these are just a few ideas of how you can enjoy ginger and also get those health benefits.
All right, so we are now at the end, and I do have here at the end, there are several resources related to actually growing the plants, and I'm putting my email in the chat box, so if you guys want this resource list, just send me an email and I will be happy to send it to you. I'm also going to share a little poll. If you don't, it's only a couple of questions. If you could just take a second to go ahead and answer that. And then as Lori said earlier, there will be a follow-up email that has her recipe card in it. And it also have a link to a short Qualtrics survey that would really appreciate you filling out because it helps us to constantly change and improve our educational programs.
Right.
I've never done a poll before. This is kind of exciting.
Yeah.
Well, we're at 50%. Science nerds like statistics.
It's great to see so many of you have joined us today and are really learning something new in our classes. And so please let us know in the survey what else we can offer, topics you want to hear, because we want to bring what interests you out there and deliver the science and the research and have some fun too.
Exactly. And we've just got a couple more seconds left in the survey.
And then we can open it up for any additional questions. If you have any, just place them in the chat box.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and I think I need to, just don't want to lose that. All right. So I think that is that there. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead, write them in the chat box, and we are here. Vanilla bean growing. I actually have somebody sending me some seeds for vanilla bean growing, so I'll be able to learn a little bit more about it. I haven't ever grown vanilla bean myself. Have you given it a try, Lori?
I have not, but that would be of interest to me. So that's a challenge for you, Jamie.
Right? Yeah, I'm getting some seeds. I've got somebody mailing them to me. Let's see. Question for you, Lori. Do you need to peel ginger for tea?
Yes. Peel it before you use it, before you thinly slice it, and then you're ready to go.
Got a request for a hydroponics class for growing veggies. That's actually not my first request, so I'm going to try to see what we can get going on that. Let's see. Vanilla is a very large orchid. That's going to be fun. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. Let's see. Oh, I have not heard that, Mary. That's an interesting thing. I'm getting my seeds from the school that I used to teach at. The botanist there is very excited. He's also sending me cocoa seeds, so we can possibly have a cacao tree on site. Email address, I will put my email in again for the resource list. Make sure I see it. There you go.
Awesome.
All right.
And make sure if you're not on our mailing list or check out our website or social media frequently, you can also join. I have some nutrition classes I did enjoy.
Oh, she froze. She has some nutrition classes that she has posted on our YouTube page.
And I'll be offering some in August and going forward. So if that is of interest to you, additional nutrition.
Oh, I don't know if you can hear me, Lori, but you've gone all kind of wonky on the internet.
Topics, make sure to check if you check out my page, as well as checking out our social media, or you can contact me. But if you want to join us, we'd love to have you in those classes as well.
Lori, you might want to type a little bit of that in the chat box. You got a little crazy for a minute on the internet. You froze and then you kind of double talked on yourself. It was quite interesting, but we couldn't understand what you were saying.
I apologize. We are in Zoom technology land here with all of our virtual learning, so it's always an interesting challenge. I will put my email address in the chat box. If you're not on the Family and Consumer Science email list, please email me and I will add you. Otherwise, you can go on our Lake County website and check out the Family and Consumer Science page. There's a link to sign up to the newsletter because I would love to have you on that list if you are not currently.
All right, and Margaret, it looks like you can't see my email. Can you see Lori's email that just got posted? No, okay. I'll spell mine. It's long. So it's JDaugerty@ufl.edu. Anybody need me to repeat it? You're welcome. Oh, holy cow. I think you're right. Hold on, let's try this.
No. Yep, you are. Thank you.
Oh, that's fun. Did that work? Yay!
Yes, that worked.
Great. How many other things did I type in that didn't matter? I answered questions in type, and I don't think you guys saw them. So if you had a question come up and you didn't get an answer, and you still want an answer, you can either email me or type it in the chat and I'll answer it now. Because I didn't realize that was a thing on this Zoom. This is the first time I've done Zoom webinar before.
Happy Friday, everyone.
Right? Yes.
All right. There we go.
All right. Well, I think that's it. You have our contact information if you have more specific questions. Keep an eye out for that follow-up email and that Qualtrics survey and the recipe card. And you can be wonderfully involved in helping to shape our program. So thanks everybody for coming.
Oh my goodness. All right, to end recording.
I'm working on it.